Very few horror movies affect me emotionally as much as this dark film has. For me, at least, it's one of the few that is truly disturbing and scary. The zombies aren't really zombies in that they're not actually dead. They're called the infected. This adds a certain realness and a quote, it could really happen element to the movie. Since in most films, the zombies aren't really possible. But people infected with a highly contagious disease that causes uncontrollable rage is more feasible. And they're infected with the rage virus, which is like a mix of Ebola and a sort of super rabies. The Ebola side causes them to bleed all over and out of their eyes and to vomit. The rabies side causes them to be filled with uncontrollable rage, where the infected run around in a wild rampage, attacking everyone and causing them to be infected too, getting their blood or vomit on others. It's really quite a disturbing film. Could the infected actually win against humanity? Towards the end of this video, I'll share the number one determining factor in this war that very few others have talked about, this hypothetical war. This video is a part of a series of hypothetical wars, and in this one we're talking about the infected versus humanity, based on the 28 days later, 28 weeks later scenario, like what would happen after the 28 weeks later film. Could these ravaging, hemorrhaging, out of control infected cause the whole world to become like them? Would there be no one left to watch The Simpsons, as one scene in this movie talks about? Or would the entire population become as Major Henry from the movie described?
He's telling me he'll never bake bread, plant crops, raise livestock. He's telling me he's futureless.
And if the whole world were to become like them, this would mean the human race would become extinct. This war would be a war for the very survival of humanity. In this video, we're going to look at both sides to see who would win this war. The infected versus humanity. So first we're going to look at the infected, the advantages they would have in this war. One of the most disturbing things, the most dangerous aspects to the infected is multiplication, the exponential multiplication of the infected. As soon as you're infected, within seconds, you're ready to turn on your very loved ones and infect and attack them as well. This leads to exponential multiplication, which is a very real danger. Somewhat like we see of this current virus going on. All it takes is one person to be infected and spreads to dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions. 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 16, 32, 64. Then it starts going into the hundreds and thousands very quickly, into the millions. Having millions of these rage-filled infected going around trying to infect more and more people. This extremely contagious rage virus gives them a true advantage. This would be a true danger to humanity if such a thing took place. This would also lead to the next problem. Humanity will lack what it needs. As we're even seeing with this current virus, things aren't available. Sometimes things just run out. You don't have any warning. Food is short in the stores. You don't have masks and goggles available, face shields, things like that. People often talk about in zombie apocalypses how, well, that's okay. I'll just go get myself a pickaxe from Home Depot or axe from there. I'll go get myself some various equipment to fight them or guns. Well, the rage virus, at the end of 28 weeks later, it spreads from Britain to France. It's in Western Europe. People generally don't have guns there. There's exceptions, of course, but the population is not armed like they are in the United States. They won't easily be able to go get guns. You might say, well, if there's a zombie virus spreading, they vomit on you, you get blood on you, they make you infected. Well, I just have goggles or face shields, a mask, or clothing to protect myself. I'll go to Home Depot and buy or Walmart to buy weapons to fight against them. Well, everybody else is going to be having the same exact idea, and you're going to go to these stores, and these things will not be available. You won't have eye protection available. You won't be able to buy shovels to fight them or guns, at least not easily. In fact, you might have to fight other people for these types of things. Shelves will be empty. You wouldn't probably even be able to find hammers or nails to board up your windows to keep these things out. They'll be gone. And this leads exactly right into the next point, the next advantage that the infected would have. Humanity will fight itself and face a breakdown of society. People will begin fighting each other for things. People will just say, trying to get these last few available things in the stores. They will fight. They will worry. They will become scared. As Quark said from Star Trek, when humans don't have everything they need, they become dangerous and violent. When there is scarcity and people feel threatened for their survival, they turn on each other. And add to this various other pressures that most in the Western world are not accustomed to. For instance, not having the internet. Okay, this might seem silly, but there's such a thing as internet withdrawal. If you no longer had your phone or internet, which could happen in this 28 weeks later scenario as society breaks down, you can face withdrawal symptoms from that, adding to the anxiety. I know for myself, even, it almost sounds a bit silly, but I have to travel overseas sometimes for work, and I might go without internet for about a month or a few weeks at a time, and it's kind of hard. I want to have my phone in front of me or my laptop in front of me. Can't. It's not available. People might also be resisting other foreign powers who are on their lands trying to help them. Countries could disagree of how to fight against this, and in that disagreement, end up fighting each other and making things worse. People might turn on each other. But humanity would have some advantages. Humanity would be able to fight back. Let's see what they could do. One thing you must understand is that many parts of the world would be relatively safe. They would be relatively safe. The movie said, and at the end of 28 days later, one man is yelling out, "Somebody's watching The Simpsons somewhere. Somebody's watching The Simpsons." What did he mean by that? He meant somewheres in the world, life was continuing as normal. Yes, in Britain, the United Kingdom was finished. Their population was annihilated. Just sporadic people here and there surviving. And they thought the whole rest of the world was also infected. That wasn't the case. At the end of the movie, they looked up and saw there's jets flying in the plane, which means civilization was continuing somewheres. People were watching The Simpsons somewheres. Likewise, even though at the end of 28 weeks later it's spreading to France, the United States will still have its military and people untouched. Canada, Brazil, Australia, Japan, China, even Russia and Eastern Europe. All these countries would still be relatively safe and have time to prepare. And that leads us to our next point. The world would have time to prepare for this. During 28 days later, I'm sure even then people would begin to prepare, but once it landed in France, that's it. Even then, other countries would have some time to prepare. Poland, Eastern Europe, Russia would get their game together. People would start, boarding up their windows to their house and mass producing maybe more boards and nails so they could do that. They would start mass producing masks and makeshift weapons to fight the zombies. Militaries would prepare. Other nations, the powerful United States of America, even Russia and China and Japan could go to help out to stop this spread, send soldiers to fight against this war for the survival of humanity. So the world would have time to prepare, and it's foolish to say otherwise. and that would make a big difference. Next, some basic protection would go a long way. Some basic protection would make a huge difference. People could have clubs, whether makeshift ones or ones they would buy from various stores for home gardening, etc. They can go a long way. Guns, protective gear. One thing people don't often even point out in zombie flicks is that zombies can't easily bite through clothing. I mean, you can have a long sleeve shirt, you got winter coats on, leather jackets. Human teeth cannot easily bite through this. Yes, it would hurt if someone were to bite you while wearing such clothing. It would hurt, but would their teeth rip through that and get their blood or saliva into your skin? Not easily. Yes, it could be done, but if you're wearing a thick winter coat and leather jacket combined, it's just not happening easily. Human teeth don't work that way. People have their windows boarded up. Then they show in the movie how there's a man who just he comes busting right through the window and attacks them. And they talked about that too, how on the streets people are becoming infected, and before you know it, they're busting through your living room window and attacking you. You have to leave your home. Now you're out in the streets, and the crowds, and you're in crowds, and the crowds are getting infected, and the crowd turns on one another. Well, people would have time to prepare. They could have their windows boarded up. It's not foolproof, but it would go a long ways, and people would have time to do this. There would be a stay-at-home order. A stay-at-home order. We see in the clip how Alice is banging on the window saying, "Done, done, done." Sounds like she's saying done, kind of. She's actually yelling "done" to her husband or partner. I know some of us want to be done with this stay-at-home order. But in this hypothetical war, this will go a long ways in protecting people. The stay-at-home order. Yes, we want to be done with it and get out. We see her banging on the window, wanting to, like as if she's tired of being stuck at home. But this would make a big difference. If people who are not able to fight would just stay home and not get infected themselves, they themselves will not then contribute to the spread, and only have those capable of fighting to deal with it. This stay-at-home order. Literally, if some people are infecting your town, just stay home. These infected will run around the streets, and those qualified, whether it's mobs of men with weapons to fight them, or the police or military, can go and wipe these infected out, while the rest just stay at home safely until the problem goes away. The next point is the rage of the infected is their weakness. As with many things in life, a strength is often also a weakness in various ways, and I'll talk about that in future videos. And with certain viruses as well, their strength is their weakness. For instance, if a virus is very deadly, sometimes it kills its own host, its own pool of those it could be infecting. That's why sometimes viruses become asymptomatic or less dangerous, so they can just spread to more people. The rage virus, its strength is also its weakness. People who are infected attack others with this uncontrollable, foolish rage. Just they see someone to infect, they just go right at them. Mind totally totally not thinking about their own safety, what could happen to them. We could have traps for them. Humanity would have traps. I mean, we could have some kind of bait for these infected where they all come running in this one direction, and then you just have long spikes, just sharpened sticks that they would just literally just run right into. They would just simply impale themselves or run into holes in the ground, foolish with spikes in them, without any thought about it whatsoever. No thought whatsoever. This blind rage, just running to attack people, will cause many of the infected to be killed and incapacitated. The next point is the militaries of the world are quite powerful. Militaries are powerful, and most would remain resupplied. No, they mentioned in how another zombie lore, zombie flicks, how there won't be factories to keep producing bullets to fight the zombies. There wouldn't be more supplies for the soldiers. This isn't really true for the rage virus, the 28 weeks later scenario. No. Why? Because it's there in Western Europe, but other countries are remaining untouched from this. For instance, the mighty and powerful United States of America, with its huge military and industrial capacity, it will be left untouched, at least for quite some time. Much like in World War II, the United States military machine and industry was pretty much untouched and able to produce weapons for the war effort against the Axis. In this scenario as well, the United States military and factories, and also that of other countries like Canada and Japan, with its huge potential industrial capacity there, and China and Russia, all would have time and the distance to safely reproduce and make more and more weapons to fight these infected, to produce protective gear for people and citizens. They would have tanks to fight these zombies, to have helicopters with machine guns plowing them away. The military, these infected wouldn't stand a chance against the militaries in most situations. Now these militaries could be losing, like we saw Britain lose, if they aren't prepared and don't have time. But humanity does have time in this situation. And that leads us to the next point. Why would they have time? It's because certain places would be relatively safe. They would be relatively safe. We mentioned, Australia, for instance. I mean, think of Australia and the United States. These places aren't getting touched for such a long time. They're not getting the islands of Oceania and New Zealand, Japan. The infected, this will not be reaching there anytime soon. This is not an airborne virus. The infected spread by infecting other people. They run. It takes quite a long time to run to other nations, to run thousands of miles, and to cross water and oceans, such as the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific, is not happening in most situations. I know one could think of exceptions, asymptomatic spreaders, as the movie itself does refer to how some people are asymptomatic and could spread the disease to others. That will be a real problem. And that's one of the biggest problems of this current virus. We have asymptomatic spreaders just passing it on to others. I think this overall wouldn't be that much of a factor in this rage virus war. Many places would be left untouched. Even Russia, with its huge military, would have time to prepare if the virus is only breaking out in France. This leads us to our next point. Powerful nations would be able to contribute to the fight. They would be able to contribute. Imagine how the United States would be untouched. They'd be able to do this. Japan, like the third largest economy of the world, they would have time to contribute to this fight. We already kind of mentioned this point, but I think it's an important one. Just like how in World War II, some countries were left untouched from the fighting, their military-industrial complex. Many countries would have this in place still, and I think they would help in this war, which is really a war to preserve humanity from going extinct. This leads us to our next point, and that is many of the infected will be out of shape. The thing is, these infected aren't really zombies. They're people. They're people with a mental disorder. And people are often out of shape. They are out of shape. They're overweight, they have health problems, or they could be old, have bad knees, or etc. And when they become infected with the rage virus, and sometimes they would be the first to get infected, those not able to fight that well or run that fast. These are the ones getting infected first. Well, guess what? How good of a chance are they going to have at infecting others when they can't run that much. I don't care about the rage virus giving you adrenaline and charging you up to just push real hard. There are limits, okay? There are limits. No matter how much you want to try, sometimes some people they just can't run a mile in 4 minutes. It's not happening. Likewise, no matter how much adrenaline someone has and how much they want to try, an extremely overweight person, or an 80-year-old person, or a person with a bad knee, they can't always run that fast. They can't run a mile in 7 minutes. They get tired after running a football field worth of length. This would be a real factor that many of these infected just wouldn't be that great at fighting. People in protective gear with good weapons would win against them. Next, we go into an important point before we get to the most important point of all. This is that many of the infected would freeze. They would freeze or at least die of exposure. They would freeze to death. Even if it wasn't freezing out, the exposure, even just 40 degrees Fahrenheit, will cause people problems before much time. This is a real issue. The infected would. The next point I want to bring up to you is the most important point of all. It's a point that is not often talked about in talking about the rage virus. This is very important and shows why humanity would have a massive chance at winning this war. What is this point? It is that the infected would die of thirst. They would die of thirst. You see, regular people, within a few days, they're going to be dying of thirst if they don't have any liquids. Even after 2 or 3 days, their body could begin shutting down. They won't function normally. Well, guess what? The rage virus is connected to Ebola. It causes people to vomit profusely, copious amounts of blood and vomit every couple of minutes, it seems like. Constantly, they're bleeding throughout their eyes and everywhere, saliva, sweating. They're running around like maniacs. They are expelling huge amounts of liquids from their bodies. And this can cause people to die of dehydration within one day, maybe 2 or 3 days. But seriously, these infected would die of dehydration within a day or 2 days or 3 days at most. The movie shows the infected at the end dying of starvation after 28 weeks, hence the movie 28 Weeks Later. That's not the case here. This should be just 2 days later, 48 hours later. Those infected are going to die of thirst. They're not going to get IVs. They can't go give themselves IVs. As you see in this picture of a man giving himself an IV, they're not going to go to hospitals and do that. They are going to be dying from this. And this is the number one reason I think the infected would be at a huge disadvantage in this war. So, what is the verdict? Who would win this war? I think when we look at all of the above factors, humanity would win. Humanity would win. Militaries of the world would help out. The infected would die of not just starvation, but of thirst, of exposure, many other factors we talked about. The infected would lose. Nevertheless, though, Western Europe, maybe Central Europe as well, would be devastated, absolutely devastated. There would be a huge loss of human life, but humanity would win. This could cause some problems or good things for Europe in the aftermath. Maybe we'll talk about this in a future video, but we know after the Black Plague of the Middle Ages, this caused a sort of economic resurgence. As many in Europe died, there was a lower population, and now there are more jobs, more resources for everyone else. Maybe this would happen for Western Europe, which is a crowded place. Maybe this would cause problems with other nations and start a sort of Cold War, as other countries like Russia and America and China were involved in helping. Who knows? Maybe because Western Europe is so weakened, it would have very porous borders. There'd be huge immigration to move into these nations that are broken down now, and such population replacement could cause issues. Who knows? But anyways, I think humanity would win, except for some other possible advantages the infected could have that we'll talk about in a later video. So, first time I saw this movie was when I was quite young. It's one of the first movies I ever saw in the theater, and wow, it was so disturbing. 28 days later and 28 weeks later. Go check these movies out sometimes. But I remember I saw this movie in the theater with my friends, and one of them, he is a big, muscular guy, about 250 pounds tall. And I never saw a man like that, grown man, act like a little kid. While he was watching this movie, he literally had his shirt pulled over his eyes through a lot of the movie. And in the one scene where the infected busts through the wall, all of a sudden, he literally leaped about 4 feet out of his seat, about 4 feet in the air out of his movie theater seat. I don't know how anyone could even do that. It looked like he just levitated out of it. He was so shocked. This movie has some absolutely shocking and unforgettable scenes. And I think that's one of the reasons it's still talked about so much today on YouTube.